the Resolution Project and in partnership with Quest Ventures and Social Collider. My name is Fiona Mills, and I am the Program Manager for Fellow Experience here at the Resolution Project. We're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, so we do ask that while our panelists are speaking, please do keep yourself on mute and go ahead and drop any questions that you have into the chat. Before we get started, we want to share a little bit about the Resolution Project as well as our partners for this panel. Resolution provides a lifelong fellowship for young entrepreneurs around the world. The support Resolution provides comes in the form of seed funding, resources, opportunities, mentorships, and initiatives like the Innovation Hubs. Resolution's Innovation Hubs were created as part of an ongoing mission to extend our network and global community of fellows. The hubs provide a space for fellows to meet, to collaborate, and partner with community members and build local innovation ecosystems through events like this, partnerships, networking, skill sharing, and more. Currently, we have 3 active hubs in Kigali, Rwanda, Nairobi, Kenya, which are both in partnership with Dahlberg Advisors, as well as our hub in Singapore in partnership with Quest Ventures and Social Collider. A bit about Social Collider and Quest Ventures. Social Collider is the impact arm of Quest Ventures and is Singapore's largest impact aggregator for social enterprises, charities, and nonprofits. Social Collider builds a unique ecosystem to support the impact organizations through working with funds, institutions of higher learning, businesses, and the government. Today, more than 530 Resolution Fellows in 82 countries and 21 US states are implementing over 320 social ventures in high impact fields such as sustainable development, gender equality, workforce development, and humanitarian relief. And over the years, the need for culturally and geographically informed training on the intricacies of pitching a venture in different regions of the world has become even more apparent. So in response, we are organizing this multi-part panel series about the intricacies of pitching, convening experts like the ones you'll meet in a moment from diverse backgrounds and to share their experiences in 3 key regions: Southeast Asia, East Africa, and Latin America, which will be coming up. So we're super excited you're here to join us. A quick glance at the impact from our fellows in the region. In the Asia Pacific region alone, there are 60 social ventures that have impacted the lives of more than 456,000 people within our fellows communities. So I wanted to share a quick snapshot of some of the really incredible impact that our fellows have had. With that, I would love to introduce our moderator and our panelists. So our moderator today is Hazik Rashid. Hazik is a Resolution Fellow and co-founder of Project Nomad, a social enterprise that empowers artisans living in rural areas through commerce and developmental projects. He is also the CEO of a direct-to-consumer startup based in Kuala Lumpur. Prior to this, Hazik was country manager of Tom's Singapore. One of our panelists is Umar Mush. Umar is a social entrepreneur based in Southeast Asia. He is the co-founder of Ethis Global and an award-winning group of investment and crowdfunding platforms with regulatory approvals in Malaysia and Indonesia, focused on impactful and Sharia-compliant finance. Ethis also recently obtained regulatory endorsements in the GCC. Ethis has firmly established itself as a leader and first mover in fintech for the Islamic and impact-focused private capital market. And our other panelist is Gwen Sim. Gwen is a senior analyst at Quest Ventures and a leading venture firm for technology companies that have scalability and replicability in large internet communities. She works closely with startups to accelerate their growth through a combination of acceleration services and programs. She's also responsible for the market access initiatives for key markets in Southeast Asia. Thank you all for being with us today. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Hazik.
Hi, thank you, Fiona. Thanks for the warm introduction. So excited to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So I guess today we have a very interesting topic, right, about pitching your own venture in Southeast Asia. And I believe there's some cultural nuances as well as different ways of pitching across different countries. So I think that there's a lot of relevance for today's topic because when I first started my social enterprise, I was just sharing this with Gwen yesterday, right? It's a very scary experience, but a very exciting one. But looking back, I kind of realized that sometimes the deal that you had back then, it's not as great as what you think it is today. And as a first-time entrepreneur, I guess that's quite an overwhelming process, right? And today, like, we have a really experienced entrepreneur with us. You know, we have Omar, we have Gwen to share with us a little bit more about the pitching process. So I guess maybe I can start off with just one main question, right? When it comes to pitching. So we do pitching for a variety of reasons. Number one, of course, is to raise funds. Number two, sometimes we actually pitch in order to attract co-founders, right? And sometimes it's to attract talent as well. So maybe I'll just ask the first question. How do you, so when it comes to fundraising specifically, right? Like, how do you start your introduction in a pitch, right? Like, how do you know what's the first thing that you should be saying and make the right impression? So feel free, Gwen, to answer the question.
Sure. I think I speak from not as a founder and not as the one pitching, but maybe I can share some different ways that some founders have pitched. There are a few categories. I would say I would maybe categorize the first one as the rehearsed one. So you can tell that the person has prepared some sort of script before. It's there is some sort of flow to it. There is a way that they kind of they have memorized the way to describe the company, and then they have prepared to have prepared themselves, I would say. And that's one category. The second is maybe a little bit more like a conversation rather than like a very formal pitch. Some don't even use a deck to present. Some have they have some sort of a little, almost a performance, like with the other fellow co-founders. And what really makes the impression, I would say, is when there's more when we can feel that more when we can feel the genuinity from the founders. So it's not like it has to be perfect. It's not like it has to come with like a hook or something that some outrageous statement to get the attention of the VC. It's really about feeling that the founder is genuine. They really wanna make this work, and they are trying to get the capital for it to work. So there's really not one sort of way, but I would say that the more impressionable ones are the ones that you can feel that they're passionate about what they're doing, and you know that, and you have assurance that they'll be working on this for a long time, which is very important to an investor.
Thank you. Thanks, Gwen. So what about yourself, Omar? Like, what do you think about it? I mean, you have started an enterprise and as a business owner, right? Scaling it up from the first time you actually pitched to where you are today. What's your experience like your learnings over the years?
Sure, thank you, Haziq. Well, maybe I'll share a bit about the context in terms of fundraising for myself and my company. So we are on both sides in the sense that we also need to raise funds for ourselves, and we have raised some funds for ourselves over the years. And at the same time, we have an equity crowdfunding platform in Malaysia, which mostly focuses on fundraising for startups. So with that, we also evaluate pitches, right? So we ourselves are pitching and trying to get money for ourselves, and we also are evaluating other startups, other founders, other businesses to match to our crowd, so our crowd can invest in them. So yeah, back to the earlier point, I think what Gwen mentioned just now about passion and sincerity, that's definitely critical, especially when it comes to pitching. When it comes to non-visual pitching or non-personal pitching, meaning an email or a submission and things like that, then that component is missing. So it really depends on the context, right? So if you're pitching face to face, you're pitching physically or virtually online like this, then I think that the authenticity part is very critical, definitely. The passion part is also very critical. But I think just touching on that point, it needs to be balanced with logic and practicality, because sometimes founders always think they have the best idea, the best future, and the best of everything, and that's good. But you need to balance it with the reality that it's going to be tough, it's going to be challenging, yet you still are going to persevere, and yet you still have a plan and yet you still have a way to overcome challenges that will come, right? If I think sometimes some founders get a bit ahead of themselves, and are overconfident and say, oh, anything that any questions thrown at me, I have the solution, no problem. It will work out easily, right? So that kind of impression is also can be alarming to investors. Yeah.
Yeah, quite funny. Just to add in, I think there were founders, when we ask things like, what's the greatest risk to your business? And then they'll be like, yeah, there's no risk. The business is great, and it's like for sure it will fly. And that's very worrying. That's honestly a huge red flag for any investor.
Right. Yeah. I guess you got to be real about it, right? Instead of like painting just like a rosy picture, but also to understand, where the risks are and how you want to mitigate those risks. So I guess my next question would be, if it's someone that is very new, right? Probably they have went through like mini programs where they have grants, and I'm pretty sure like there's quite a number of resident fellows that just got some grants. And if you want to start to raise, for example, your first pre-seed round, right? How should you structure the pitch deck then? How do you actually start?
So I mean, I can go first. I think how to structure the pitch deck is you should have different versions. I would say the first is a very short teaser, where you use that to send it to the investors that you want to pitch to, just to get their interest to hop on the call. So when you're reaching out cold to people, you don't want to overwhelm them with like a 30-page deck or like an information sheet with the history of your entire business. You want to kind of drop some hints that this could be something exciting for an investment, but not revealing too much, so that the investor would want to schedule a call to find out more. So that's that maybe like a 5 to 7 page ones, and then there will be the full deck that you present, depending on how long you get with the investor after you have the schedule. If it's like 30 minutes, you just time it accordingly to what is available. But what should always be inside the deck, no matter if it's like the shorter version or the longer version, is, which I also find sometimes is often missing, is the problem that you're trying to solve. I think a lot of people try to fit solutions to problems rather than the other way around, and to kind of elaborate and emphasize on how pressing this issue is, and how big an opportunity this is something that would be definitely needed inside the deck. I would say sometimes what else is missing is competition. I do not believe that there is any solution out there that doesn't have competition. And so to kind of show that you are a mature founder as well, and that you know what's out there in your industry, and you know what's going on in other places and in your own domestic market, you should always have a slide on the competitive landscape and how you would kind of go around it. That's also one of the favorite questions I like to ask, because it really would give the founder, it's great for us to find out if the founder really knows the market well enough, and for us to trust them to navigate the waters as the business grows as well.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that, Haziq.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, and Haziq, I think you also have experience. You can definitely share as well to add on, what we say.
Sure.
I wanted to build on what Gwen mentioned about competitors, because I myself faced that problem or that challenge when we first started, because we operate in impact investment space and Islamic financing or Sharia compliant space. So we were actually the first in the region and one of the first in the world. And at that time, my mind was stuck that we are different, we are unique, we have no competitors. And I thought that was a good thing, right? We are the first, right? So we have a lot of opportunity, and that's what I was trying to convince investors and partners about. But I realize now it's very important to have competitors, because if really you're the only one, then maybe the market doesn't exist, right? Because you need competitors to validate the market. And even though you will be unique in some way, there will be some comparables. There will be some maybe different contexts or differentiated product or different market. Especially if it's a different market, that can be very useful as well. But you just need to be careful to show how there are parallels in the market that you are serving, right? So for example, let me give you an example. We are in Indonesia P2P, which is lending-based, crowdfunding, investment-based financing, and right now countries like let's say Pakistan are just starting. So if a startup founder in Pakistan is approaching a VC, he can use, and he says, I'll be one of the first 5 in Pakistan because there's none yet, right? Regulations are just about to come out. But he can definitely talk about, look at Indonesia, a similar demographic, different part of the world, but we have these parallels with that market, and it's boomed, right? And it's a matter of time before we boom, and there are also other markets like that. Then automatically it makes a lot more sense to the idea stage or early stage startups proposition. Yeah. But
I really,
yeah, go ahead.
No, so I really like the fact that you mentioned that competitors do validate your market space, right? I think it's quite something that people think of it that way. Especially like as an early stage founder, whenever you think that there's a competitor, you're like, no, I gotta be super different from them, right? Instead of like thinking it the other way around. So that's quite refreshing. I actually wanted to touch on like what Gwen mentioned earlier, right? Gwen did mention about problem, highlighting the size of the problem, right? And sometimes I guess when people try to pitch, they don't know how to simplify that problem. It gets a little bit too complex, and then in the early part of the pitch, everyone just gets lost, right? So what's the best way for you to kind of like highlight just and make it as simple as possible? Yeah, like what's the best way to do that?
I guess it really will depend on why it's complicated in the first place, right? Is it because it's like a new technology that nobody knows about, or is it because it's a very, very, very niche problem that nobody hears about? But you can, it's really, really important to simplify it, as you mentioned, just to share some experience. Like on a weekly basis, like myself, I meet up to like the max I had was like 10 startups a week, and so you can imagine like how much information that we're trying to load every time in a meeting. So it's really, really important to like to come across as something easy to understand, especially to VC, especially at the beginning when you're describing a problem as well. I think when it is very hard to explain, you could use analogies, or you could maybe think about like how like a primary school child would try to understand this, or you can, I think one useful tip would be to describe the user journey, or describe like how someone would use your product or service. Sometimes when you try to describe like, okay, this product has these features, it's going to help in this way. I personally often don't understand how it actually works. Like I need to picture it in my head, like, okay, a user go onto the website or go onto this platform, or in what situation will I think about your product or your service. I think thinking on the side of consumer or the person who is using your service or product would be very helpful to explain it in layman terms, because then it would be more easy to understand, easy to follow.
Thanks, Gwen. I guess even when it comes to the topic of problem, right? It depends on who you're pitching to, I guess. Like how big, for example, right? How do you know, like based on the scale of the problem, who do you actually go to fundraise, right? There are people that you actually go to just because and their KPIs that they want to invest in companies that have $1 billion in valuation, for example, right? So as an early stage founder, like how do you know who do you go to?
You mean like which VCs to kind of
which VCs
shortlist?
go to, like how? Yeah, exactly. Like in terms of like coming out with the leads, right?
Actually, I would say one tip for early stage investors as founders, especially if you guys have not as much experience, is to, in the initial stages, just reach out to those that you're actually not too keen on, not the investors that you're not exactly like, you don't really like, you don't actually, as in you might want their money, but they're not like your first choice, just for you to practice and for you to understand what kind of questions will be asked, and what are the common misunderstandings or common questions that they will ask, so that you can get prepared for the actual VC that you actually want to approach. How to shortlist? I think a lot of times the mandate of the VC is shown on their website. So a very simple Google search will be able to let you know, like, do they look at impact or social enterprises at all, or do they have already portfolio companies in the similar space or like an adjacent space as you guys? So then you know that they are actually looking at your space and would be interested to take the call. You can also tap on your own network or your own set of advisors, mentors to ask if any, if your project falls under any VC's mandate. So I think when the VCs are actively looking for what you're doing, it is a lot easier to sell the idea rather than try to convince a VC to expand their mandate to include what your project does. So I think looking at websites, speaking to the people first, or speaking to some of their portfolio companies and their founders to get to know the VC would be very helpful for you to shortlist and kind of concentrate on a few.
I have 2 questions for Gwen, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Gwen, just practical, advice from your perspective. So if a founder sees his, competitor or similar company in the media getting funding from VC A, B, C, should they then try to reach out to VC A, B, and C? Or what was the likelihood of that being useful? What do you think?
I would say if they have invested in a direct competitor, it is quite unlikely that they would look at another one. And actually, it's quite a dangerous move to approach them because they might ask for information from you and kind of pass it to their portfolio company. So that's something to look out for also. So yeah, you should try to look for those VC's competitors who have not had such a portfolio company. So then they will be looking most of the time if like, just to compete with the other VC as well.
All right. And then in terms of outreach to VCs, does LinkedIn work? Do VCs typically take it seriously when there's a LinkedIn message?
So it depends. I would say at a partner level, no, I don't think they look at LinkedIn messages much. At the analyst level, yes, because sometimes they have KPIs on how much they need to deal source. So you can, I think there's no harm, but you shouldn't also just like copy and paste for every single VC, because sometimes the VC circle is pretty small. So I think sometimes your startup gets mentioned and it's like, oh, they contacted me. Oh, then, they contacted me too, that kind of thing. It doesn't reflect very well on your startup. So if you're going to reach out on LinkedIn, which is a viable way, just not the best method, it should be really, really specific on why you reached out to that particular VC and not just like a generic, hey, I'm fundraising and take a look. Then your odds are much higher and they will take you much more seriously.
All right, thank you. Back to you, Haziq.
No problem.
Thank you, thanks. So yeah, I guess I have a question as well for yourself, Omar. Like based on the conversation that we had, right? And at an early stage, how do you actually do fundraising? What was your experience like? Early on in the conversation, on a later stage, like you have some referrals from friends as well, right? So on the early phase, like how did you start off?
Sure. So I think maybe like a disclaimer as well. I believe fundraising from different types of investors and different sources is quite different, right? Fundraising or approaching VCs is different from approaching direct angel investors or angel groups. Also different from approaching an equity crowdfunding platform, if that's available where you are. And there are some global equity crowdfunding platforms. Of course, those will be a bit more competitive typically. So I mean, it really depends on where you want to look. And of course, there's the 3 Fs, the friends, family, and the people who like you. So for those that kind of network, if you have networks, then of course it's probably good to try your own networks, because then there's already a relationship there. But for me, what I did was I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. So when this company set up, when Ethis set up, back then I made a choice not to go to friends and family, and I was trying to do something in a specific industry, which is in Islamic finance. And so I approached the big boys of Islamic finance, individuals, to be angel investors, and some of them came on board. So that could be one way if you feel that you're disrupting or providing new value to a specific industry, and you do not have your own direct network or so on, then angel investors could come from the people who are in the industry, who are aware that they are being disrupted and they want to be part of something new. I think that's something, in my experience, that has borne fruit for me. So today we have quite a number of leaders from the industry who are our angel investors, and so when we want to go for larger fundraising or partnerships, they're very suitable for us to reach out to assist us. Yeah. So I think that's one area that probably is not much talked about, but you can try to approach those that you're disrupting, basically, individuals in that field. And for me, it's worked out.
Cool. Yeah. So let's say if you were to approach those kind of individual, right? I also want to touch on the topic of valuation. I think it's a very interesting topic. And a lot of early stage founders, sometimes they feel a bit lost. How much equity do they give out, right? When they are first raising, and how do they determine their valuation in that stage?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. So it's honestly more of an art than a science, especially in the early stages. And probably people are sick of hearing that already, but I think one concrete way of looking at it, or having just like a gauge of how we might value your company, is to see like comparables, which are like let's say in another market or in another adjacent industry, what kind of fundraising activity was there, what kind of valuations were there. So a good benchmark to kind of sieve out information, because like let's say in tech in Asia, they always say how much they've raised, but they don't disclose how much the valuation was. But you can typically take about 15 to 20% as your benchmark. So let's say if they raised 1 million, you can kind of estimate that was maybe a 15 to 20% equity that was given out, and then you can do your own back calculations from there. I think that is a somewhat safe benchmark to use, so that you can see how VCs value your company, value the companies in that same space. But specifically to your own company, usually how VCs value it is based on a certain multiple. So it's either if you're like a commerce platform, it's a multiple on your GMV, gross merchandise value, or it could be a multiple on your revenue. Hardly anyone has positive EBITDA, so nobody does multiples on EBITDA, but usually it's on revenue or GMV or AUM for a finance related company. So though which multiple to use can be based on also comparables, past transactions, let's say some listed companies also, how much they're valued at right at the moment. But honestly, it really fluctuates based on how excited VCs are about your space at that point in time, and a lot of FOMO comes into play as well. I would say the best way to kind of figure out what valuation you should set yourself at is to take all these different methods and come up with some sort of middle ground, and then you go out and test the market. That's when you find the investors that you're not so interested in, to see whether how's their appetite on such a valuation or not, and then you can adjust along the way. Yeah, it really fluctuates, and it's very hard to determine one certain number that everyone will accept.
Mm-hmm. So let's say, like, if you were to use let's say a multiple, right, or comparables, right, and you're very early on in your stage, right, like, how developed should your business model actually be, right? Should you really have like a certain level of traction before you decide that what company A, B, C could actually be my comparable, or could it just be like pure ideation stage when you use that multiple or comparable approach?
I think you can use the comparable approach at any stage, just that let's say if you're still at ideation, it might be more like a projection in the next 2 to 3 years, like, okay, this are what we set out to do and achieve and become, and then that's why we're using such a comparable. If you're already generating traction, then yeah, of course you can use the method.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks. Anything you want to add on, Omar?
Well, valuation is always a tricky topic. Generally, institutions and angel investors, I would say, have different appetites when it comes to investment. One thing interesting that I've observed is that if you approach directly angel investors, sometimes they are not able to really accept high valuations, especially if they're not really technology investors. However, I'm not just saying this because we run an equity crowdfunding platform, but in general, in many countries, equity crowdfunding platforms do have a good base of investors and tend to give quite good valuations for early stage companies. And there have been a number of cases, even our own projects, where we have VCs coming into the same deal that we are doing or that we are raising from. In fact, we work with VCs right now to invest in the projects and the companies that are on our platform. So definitely VCs are much more thorough, and you need to be able to defend yourself. But if you manage to do so, then I guess VCs is what can potentially give much higher valuations. In terms of how you come to your valuation, so yeah, I mean, what Gwen said is the way it is. There's no magic formula. There are many formulas, and you probably need to have 3 or 4 of them and come up with an average that's defensible. There are even today platforms that help you with your valuation. Like for us, we work with our partner Equidam. You can Google it, EQUIDAM. So Equidam, you just pay them a little bit and you input your data and they will churn out, for example, your discounted cash flow based on different methodologies, based on the scorecard method and VC method and many different methods. You can put weightages on them and come up with a report. Because in most countries, I would say it's not easy to get a third party to value you, and I don't think it's necessary. But to figure out how to do all of this on your own also takes a lot of time and effort. So that's where these kind of platforms can help. In terms of how aggressive your valuation should be or can be, I think, to me, I agree with Gwen, the comparables method is probably the main method. But at the same time, you still need to have some scientific method. Typically, it's financial projections, which then link to your discounted cash flow model. And from there, you get your valuation. And that's based on projections, right? So at the end of the day, your assumptions and projections must be also something that you can back up. At the end of the day, I think investors, whether VCs or angels, they know that business will change, the business plan will change, the business concept may change, the market will change. But when you have many requests for funding or many pitches for funding, then the one that's most prepared, that's most logical, that's most exciting, of course, will have an edge over the rest. So if you come unprepared, if you don't have all this ready, then definitely the VC is not gonna take you seriously, right? Because you didn't take your own fundraising seriously. So I think the preparation is very important, even though we know that you'll probably change a lot, and it's likely not to happen the way you plan it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from the VC side also, we are very well aware that any projections made is not going to be accurate. So it really boils down to what the market in general feels about that industry or the potential of that industry. And especially at the very early stage, I would say Series A and below, I would say that the comparables method or just that general sensing of the market is the key indicator that VCs use to see whether it's a reasonable deal. Some of the VCs have a minimum equity stake that they require for every investment. So then the amount you raise versus how much equity you're giving out, which is related to your valuation, is also a function of that, depending on which VC that you want to approach as well.
Putting my founder's hat on, my general advice would be raise what you need when you really need it. Don't try and over raise and overvalue and so on, especially at the early stage, right? Just getting some money to grease the wheels so you can reach another milestone and you can prove yourself in that short period. Then you can quickly start to push up your valuation and so on. But in the early stage, probably being too aggressive or overconfident is going to be tough. By the end of the day, it's a matter of time versus and effort in fundraising, because fundraising takes a lot of time and effort. I think founders underestimate that it takes a lot of time and effort typically, unless you really have very good network. So bear in mind that the tougher your sell, the tougher your pitch, to accept, for the market to accept, the longer it will take or the more difficult it will be. So it may make sense for you to, tone it down a little bit for the sake of speed. Yeah, so that VCs can see that it's a good deal, or angel investors can see that it's a good deal, instead of sometimes being a little bit too stubborn. I found a number of startups like that. I'm not going to raise money unless I get this valuation, and they keep pushing it, and in the end they fizzle out, right? Because it took too long and they ran out of money. So yeah, you gotta have these things in mind as well. But yeah, as a founder, I think my advice would be raise what you need when you need it, and try and give a fair deal and open deal and be transparent. Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very insightful. We actually have like a little bit of time left. I see quite a stream of questions that we have. Maybe we can just like wrap up this section with actionables, right? When it comes to the actual pitch, what is frequently missing, and what is that few key things that you should avoid in pitching?
Right. So the first part on what is typically missing, as I mentioned just now, like talking about the problem, why it's significant, and the competition. I think what is often missing is also that long-term vision of the company. Sometimes, like especially for early stage investors, we're looking a lot on the founders and trying to make bets on founders whom we have confidence that they will keep going at their startup, and not like just give up halfway. I think James always mentions that James is the partner at Quest, just for everyone's context sake. He always says that the number one or the top reason that startups die out is because the founders give up. So on the investor side, we are always looking out for founders who have that long-term vision and have that very key reason to work on this for a very, very long time, and overcome challenges that are on its way. So having that, sharing about what you think your company will grow into, how it will grow, what it would look like in the future, is something that will give us assurance that you are looking at this at a very, very long-term point of view. It might sound like a bit like things will always change on the way and everything, but just to know that you guys are thinking long-term is also something that will reassure the VC. So that's something that is always missing in my experience. And the second question was what to avoid doing, was it?
Yeah.
What to avoid doing? I think
are there certain things that is a big no-no, right? Like you're not supposed to say that, and you say it out. Like for example, like one of the things that I tend to see is again, overcomplicating things, right? Or making the ask at the wrong timing. Very early on in the deck, they already start to make the ask, and then there's no context, and then basically just ruin the entire pitching session.
Yeah, I think the ask should always be at the end, where everyone has some context and everyone already knows what's going on with your business, what you're trying to do, and things like that. I think a big no would be things like not being transparent when questions are asked. I think sometimes the impression of VCs is that they are sharks and they are just like digging information out of you, and you don't want to reveal anything too early and things like that. But I think that comes across as a little bit amateur in terms of fundraising. I would say that you can hide, you can try to avoid oversharing very confidential information. You can say that, yeah, we'll be happy to share a data room in the future, but saying that no, we don't want to share, or we have that, we are like anti-VC is very counterproductive to try to raise money. So just gotta be genuine and like be a bit more smart in trying to avoid sharing information, rather than just I don't want to share anything with you guys. You guys will take my information and run, and things like that.
Yep. I also want to highlight one thing there, right? Based on like my own experience pitching as well. I do remember, like, usually during the Q&A sessions, right, there are situations where probably you do not share enough information about certain things, or you might not have like, prepared the data set for that, right? Especially when it comes to your projection or your finances. And then sometimes when, VCs actually kind of like ask you questions, and then when you feel really nervous, you feel obliged to answer. And I've seen like, even myself, sometimes a couple of my friends, right, we tend to just start panicking and plug numbers, right? And then you realize that, damn, like that's actually like a wrong thing to do, right? So I guess like from myself, like, based on my experience, it's okay to say that you'll get back to them later, that you work out the numbers. Yeah, maybe I want to pass on to Omar, right, to see, what is your own experience on that? Like, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think more of reiterating actually some of the points that were already mentioned, because I think the basics hold for all or most contexts and countries. I believe there's people from around the world here. So I mean, assuming you're in maybe a second call or third call, not the first call, right? The first call, general pitch and so on. Maybe you don't reveal too much, or you just go along with the flow based on the questions. But especially, maybe the second or third session, you should definitely point out challenges and risks. That's my view, and be open about it instead of trying to hide it, because at some point it will still be discovered typically, right? So it's better to be upfront about it rather than paint unrealistic, paint a picture that's not so accurate and hide certain things. And later on, those things are brought up, then it becomes an issue. So I think being open, transparent, highlighting risk, highlighting potential issues or challenges that you face is very important. And you also need to make sure that you compensate for that, in that sense that the upside is still greater than all this risk, right? There's no point saying there's so much risk and the upside is not sufficient, right? So then you just backstabbing yourself or shooting yourself in the foot. So yeah, to reiterate the point on transparency and honesty, I think that's very important. Investors can sense it, investors can see it sometimes when you're just trying to pull a fast one. So from the very beginning, you should have that in mind. That's my advice, to be very open and transparent and honest. Touching on the point of secrets and secret sauce, and at the end of the day, there's so many ideas floating around all the time. It's about execution at the end of the day, right? Execution it's everything. You can have the best ideas, but you can't execute, or your team can't execute, then it's not going to work. So don't worry too much, I would say, about ideas and about sharing information with VCs. Although, yeah, maybe certain things, of course, you can keep confidential until a later stage. Yeah. In terms of mistakes or things to avoid, pressurizing or following up is very tricky. So what I typically try to do, and what I see some startups do well, is during the discussion, at the end of the discussion, or at the end of the pitch, they actually discuss about following up and say, can I follow up with you, once a week or next week or this date, or when can we have our next meeting, and so on. Because I think following up is a challenge for a lot of people. You don't want to bug the VC too much, then you seem desperate. But if you don't follow up, then the VC will forget about you because there are others chasing them, right? So I think so-called permission marketing, where you discuss on the next steps and timelines during that call, and the VC agrees to it, I think that makes a lot of difference in helping you close the deal. Yeah, I don't know.
Totally agree. Yes. I really appreciate it when they take the time and effort to ask how they should follow up. I think that's greatly appreciated.
Great.
David,
Very insightful.
has his hand up. David, I think maybe there's a question.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. Good evening, guys. Yeah, I want to ask Gwen now. She mentioned long term. Perhaps she can specific long term is what? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Gwen, thanks. Gwen.
Yeah, sure. I would say up to 10 years. I think actually it depends on what you are building also. If you can reach sort of that scale or vision within 2-3 years, that could also be a timeline, but more of like when will you say that like your primary goal of your startup has been achieved, when you're trying to solve a certain issue, like usually start out with one product, one service, and then you slowly expand so that you cover maybe most of the value chain or whatever that your project is looking at. So usually I would ask usually what the startups would share is like a 2-3 year plan, and then I will ask up like 5 to 10 years basically it's not really more about the timeline, it's more about what you envision the product to become in the future.
So can I say that is like your vision? Is it relevant? Like your vision, you share the vision with the VC. A vision is a long term.
Yeah. So it's yeah, the vision should be shared. I think it shows that you are forward thinking also, which really helps with the assurance part.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, David. We have another question. So the question is that are there any differences between pitches to investors and also like pitching for other opportunities? That means pitching either for an NGO, pitching for a fellowship, or what are those differences like?
Fellowship wise, I maybe wouldn't be able to comment too much, but I mean, Quest runs both accelerators and we invest directly. So the key difference, actually, I think the pitch is about the same. It's just that the stage of the startup is different. Maybe Umar can chime in if you have gone through any fellowship or programs.
I wouldn't know about fellowships. Maybe I can share for angel investors and for VCs. I don't think that answers the question, but yeah, maybe it's useful for some of you.
Actually, yeah, I can answer the question, but I'll let Omar go first since I'm a fellow myself, right? But yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
No, I mean, for angel investors and VCs, the difference is angel investors are not professional investors. So sometimes you really gotta, for lack of a better phrase, dumb it down or simplify it to the extent that it can resonate with them because they are not in the space. Whereas for VCs, they're definitely more savvy, more in the know, right? So I think the way the complexity or the level of depth of how you pitch your company is quite different, whether you're going to angels or VCs. And especially VCs that are experts in their space that you really need to, for example, let's say you're a fintech like us, you go to a VC that has invested in many fintechs, they will definitely have a lot of knowledge about fintech, so you need to know your stuff. And you need to display that you know your stuff. When you present to an angel investor who may not know much about fintech, then it needs to be really relatable to that person. Like this is how my product is going to help people, not this, the technology that's going to revolutionize finance and change this and change that. Because they don't understand finance maybe. Right? So I think that's just something I can add.
Thanks, Omar. So regarding the question, like I think the concept remains the same, right? Number one is that you need to know who you are pitching to, and you need to know what they actually want to hear, right? When you're pitching to them. So for example, like a recent experience that I have is I was talking to basically like an e-commerce aggregator, and talking to the e-commerce aggregator, right? Even prior to that, I had a look at their website, right, to kind of like do a quick study. And you find out that their requirements is very, very specific, right? For example, they're looking at companies that have, at least $1 million, for example, in their annual revenue. Early stage, 20% goes to marketing costs. And when you pitch, you want to bear in mind that number one, your company actually fits the role of what they're looking for, right? And you want to make sure that you actually address whatever that they're looking out for. And that in mind, for example, if you were to actually pitch for fellowships, right? Number one, the main question is that as a fellow, what are they investing in, right? If you're pitching to someone that's going to give the fellowship to you, so obviously they're actually investing in the fellow themselves. So apart from the enterprise of the project that you're doing, you might want to highlight your capabilities as a fellow versus so me and a friend of mine, we actually run basically a small program, and we give out like funds for people that does social impact projects as well. And increasingly, like there's this thing called a social return of investment. And typically, like when you're raising money or you want donations for your social enterprise or even for your NGO, right? You want to kind of like project down the road instead of like just money, right? How deep does the impact actually go? And there's actually an accounting framework for that. You can just like Google social return of investment, and it shows you, right? Downline, what is the direct impact they actually make, which eventually makes economic impact to the people that you're actually helping. So I hope that answers the question. Right. Yeah, go for it, Omar.
Just a random thought that crossed my mind, which I think is quite important, and maybe Gwen can add on to it. So, when you go to VCs, typically, not all of them will say yes, right? A lot of them will say no. I think as a founder, it's good to remember that maybe the no is not is a no now, but it may be a yes in future. So I think that keeping in touch with VCs that you've pitched to and sharing with them updates every once in a while, or finding a way to just reconnect with them here and there, I think that makes a difference, because at some point you're already on their radar, right? They may not be investing in you now for whatever reason, but especially if you have good progress, then they may get interested again. So I think that's something that I just wanted to share that I feel is important. Although on the VC side, I'm not sure whether it's true. Maybe Gwen can let us know.
Yeah, I think you might not want to spam everybody, but especially when you have very good news to share, you should definitely keep the VCs on your updated on that. You should totally do that for VCs who say that you're too early for them. So as you progress and as you grow and you reach that minimum revenue or whatever metric that they're tracking, and then you become part of their investment mandate scope, then you should always keep that relationship warm. I think like the kind of frequency, I think quarterly is something that is a good sort of frequency. If you have built a relationship with the analyst or the associate, you can totally also just like meet up for coffee or things like that. Most of the time, VCs are willing to have a chat also to find out of like your insights on the industry and things like that. It's always a win-win situation for both.
Thank you, Gwen. We have one more question. Right, so are there any specific questions that one should prepare to answer when pitching a social project or a social enterprise?
I would say what is often missing, at least in my experience, because yeah, I think we have to keep in mind that VCs, especially even if they have an impact or a social impact fund, they are also looking at financial returns at the end of the day, along with the impact side of things. So that part of how the VCs, of how the fund can make its money on the investment is something that there's always that they're thinking about every time they listen to a pitch, and whether the potential of the company and things like that. So if you could address that in the pitch, that this is how we are going to actually make money, this is the business model, is actually sustainable and is revenue generating, and it would become a sustainable business, it'd be much appreciated for the investor.
Thank you, thanks. And Omar, like for yourself, like pitching for your own social enterprise, right? Do you build kind of like a question list from like day one, slowly building it up and then preparing it for like the next speech, or how do you go about structuring it?
Sure. So I think I do a few things similar to what Gwen mentioned just now. I have a one-pager, a teaser, but my teaser actually has not just teasing, but actually some of the actual details, because I prefer to be upfront, even valuation and stuff. But I think that's not so common. So either a teaser or a one-pager investment memo. I'll always prepare that. That forces me to think of what's really important as well, right? To put into that one-pager. Then I have a shorter deck. I think Gwen mentioned 5 or 6 slides, but the one I have is 10 to 15 typically. Then there's a lot more details in a longer deck, which is essentially the annex portion, which can go up to 20-30 slides. And I try to cover as much as I can, from risk, from the upside to the risk, context, market, everything, whatever you can find, you can Google it. There's a lot of checklists out there. But as I pitch, sometimes, like what Gwen mentioned as well, I go for those who are not really top of my list to get their input, especially people who are negative or who are difficult to convince, right? So all the questions I will receive, I'll formulate responses, and then I'll put it in data room, so that future investors can also, who have similar questions, I can immediately refer to that. So as I go through my fundraising process, I build up my so-called FAQ, and even continue beefing up my other material if there's something significant that should be added in. So it's an ongoing process. I think that's the way I do it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Omar. So if there's any last questions, feel free to raise your hand, but I see Fiona is back up. So that means that we're coming to the end of the session. But I feel that it has been a really wonderful session. Really great insights and tips by both Omar and Gwen. And if you have not taken down notes, I think these should be made available for you, right? I'll just pass on to Fiona.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hazik. And I hate to stop the conversation. I know I was thoroughly enjoying it. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. I just want to say a special thank you to our partners at Quest Ventures and Social Collider. Special shout out to Russ and James for help coordinating, as well as Loretta for all of your support with this panel. Of course, thank you to our moderator, Hazik, as well as our phenomenal panelists, Omar and Gwen, for sharing their expertise and insight. I know I learned a lot, and as Hazik said, we will be putting this up on Resolution's fellow portal, so keep an eye out for that. You're always welcome to go back and read through and listen. Thank you all for joining us, and I very much look forward to seeing you at the next Pitching Around the World panel.